Hey, good morning. I'm Kyle Gatlin, senior pastor. Attendance pads were passed around earlier. Make sure everybody on the road gets a chance to sign in. We'd love to know a little bit about you. If you're first time here today, we are welcoming you. Give us a little information about that, but primarily pick up a gift bag. It's in the lobby in the middle to the right as you exit the middle doors. To the right side of that, pick up a bag there. It has a gift in there for you. It has some other stuff is there as well, information about our church. All right. I've noticed something, particularly I noticed it on my bank statement. I figured out how many things I pay for content. I don't know if this is you, but I get a bill for YouTube TV. I have a bill for Disney Plus and Hulu and ESPN. I think I have a bill for Apple, Paramount Plus, Netflix. Am I the only one? Oh, Sirius XM. Am I the only one? Am I the only one? There's probably others out there that y'all have, like what? I think Peacock is out there, one of those pay things as well. There is just a lot of content, right? And there's other stuff. I've seen Magellan advertised recently. I've seen some other ones, and I'm going like, I got to cut off what I have. Fortunately for me, my Walmart Plus membership carries my Paramount Plus. That's not actually technically an extra bill, so I was happy about that. And I got grandfathered in many years ago with the ESPN, Hulu, Disney Plus thing. Anyway, so it's still too much, really. I'm pretty sure I'm paying for Apple. I think I'm paying for Apple TV. I can't remember because I don't use it. I really haven't turned it on in like 2 months. I'm going, I got to cancel that thing. But there's something about content that we absorb it. We absorb it. And that's just the stuff we pay for. You know, there's other things we subscribe to. We subscribe to podcasts, and, Joe Rogan's a big deal, and there's plenty of other people that we subscribe because we want that content, right? And we also see this content stuff on places like YouTube Shorts, the Reels, the Threads. I have no idea what Threads is. Somebody send me a thread. I'm going like, I wear size 36 pants, and I have no idea what they mean by Threads because I can't see anything they send me on that. There's the Shorts, the Reels, the Instagram, Exeter. Isn't that the name of it now? Exeter, Twitter and X. Anyway, all these things where you can see this stuff. There is content everywhere, and we actually know people in our community that produce content. Apparently, people want to see the things that they produce. So we know people like that. There is content everywhere. It's like it's a insatiable appetite that we have for content. And with all this content out there, with all this content available, with all this content we are looking at, we go to bed at night, we're looking at content. And I don't know about you, but if you start looking at one video, all of a sudden you get all the other ones just start popping up, and no, you all look at this one, look at this one, look at this one, look at that. An hour later, you can't remember the first one you looked at, right? I looked at one Savannah Bananas video, and I get them all the time now, all right? I'm seeing all these Savannah Banana baseball team videos, just all the time. And it's feeding our appetite. And we keep going deeper and deeper into this rabbit hole of this content. And here's my question for you. My question for me. With all this access to content, can we ever be content? With all this access to content, can we be content? Can we be content? Paul says yes. Paul says yes. This is in Philippians 4:11. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. Paul is writing to people in Philippi. The people in Philippi apparently think he needs something. They think that he is in some type of need. They have a concern for him. Verse 10, actually before this, he speaks to this. Thank you for your concern for me. Anyway, he's writing this to them. He's not actually with him. He's writing this to them. They want to do something for him, but because of distance, they cannot. And he acknowledges that as well. He said, basically, thank you for being concerned about me. But he says, however, I'm content in my circumstances. I appreciate you wanting to help me, but I'm okay. I'm okay because I've learned to be content in whatever the circumstances. Whatever they had heard about Paul, whatever issues he was going through, whatever it was, he was saying, I'm good. I am good. And here's the principle I believe that comes out of this. Contentment is achieved by choice and repetition, not by chance. Contentment is achieved by choice and repetition, not by chance. What was Paul's 2 words? Learned and whatever. Learned and whatever. He had learned this. He had learned this contentment in all the circumstances he was in. Whatever they were. Whatever they were. I don't know if you remember learning. Some of us have not, quote unquote, learned in a while. But if you go back to the very beginnings of our existence, we learned by choice and repetition. We learned our ABCs by repetition. We learned our multiplications by repetition. I learned typing not by a class, but by repetition. And this was long before word processors that I learned to type. Manual typewriter. Can I get an amen for whiteout? All right, so I love that stuff. I bought stock in whiteout, I believe, having to do so much. But I just started typing all the time. That's how I learned to type, by repetition. But I chose to do that, right? I chose to learn how to type, and so I could get proficient at it. I thought I'd hit heaven when I went to my first church in Kentucky. My church when I was in grad school. They hired me, and after hours, I had access to a typewriter that was actually a word processor too, where you could type out a one line, you could edit it, then hit enter, and it types it out. I thought I'd gone to heaven. Then 3 years later, I finally get my own computer, and that's even better, right? Dot matrix printer. Anybody remember dot matrix printer? Anyway, so by over and over, by making a choice to practice, I learned it. I learned it. And Paul is saying here, we do the same thing. We learn contentment. We don't naturally choose that. You know that? That's not our default. Contentment is not our default. But we have to choose contentment. And we have to choose it over and over again. Let me give you 3 examples of this choice, right? Like for finances. Let me talk about that for just a second. In finances, I have to choose to be content with my finances. And I've chosen to be content my entire life with my finances. And here's the way that I check myself if I'm content with my finances: if I give the first 10% to God, or in this case, give it to the church. My case, I always gave it to my local church, wherever I was serving. That's how I checked myself. Am I content with what I've got coming in? If I am, I'm giving 10% away. Because 100% is God. He's allowing me to keep 90%. I'm going to give him the first 10%. In 1992, 6 months after my wife and I were married, moved to our first church, Williams Memorial, south of Blountstown. north of Weewill's. Y'all know exactly where that is, don't you? Anyway, Florida. My salary was called minimum salary at the time in the other denomination, which they set the bare minimum, and that's what that church paid. That first year, when I was looking into it just for fun, I qualified for food stamps. I qualified for food stamps as a full-time pastor at that church. I did not get on that, but I qualified. Actually, I qualified for the whole 5 years I was there. I qualified because we added kids. We added 2 kids while we were there. But I was content in that. And I knew I was content because I always was giving the first 10% to the church. You see, we can be content in good financial times and bad financial times. You can be content in both of those. And I'll give you a secret here. If you can be content in the bad financial times in your life, it makes the good financial times a whole lot sweeter. It really does. Here's another area where I think that we ought to learn to be content in our relationships, particularly our marriages. Now, I'm going to be honest. The word content is not very sexy, is it? It does not roll off the tongue and you're going like, I want to make a bumper sticker that says I'm content, right? That's just not going to sell. It's not sexy. It's not flashy. But here's what goes on when people do these vows at weddings. I've done a few of those the last couple weeks. And in these vows, the word content is not used, but it is implied. Let me give you an example. For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, whatever the circumstances, I vow to you that I will be with you. Who you are standing before me right now, I am content with that person that I'm promising to spend the rest of my life with. Now, we're not going to write that in vows, are we? Honey, I am so content with you. Yeah, just not going to work, right? That just doesn't sing in the vows. But that's what we're doing. We're saying, I'm content. I have this deep contentment with who you are and want to spend the rest of my life with you. The problem that we get into in our relationships is we make it about content. We make our relationships about content rather than be contented. You see, when we start looking at content, that's self-serving. If relationships are about content, that's a self-serving part, selfish part on me. And if content is what I'm looking at in relationships, then there's no way I'm going to be able to withstand the inevitable conflict, the inevitable boredom, the inevitable unmet expectations, because it's based on content rather than being contented. So that's why contentment is always achieved by choice and repetition, not by chance. Not by chance. What about our jobs, the thing that we do to make a living? The world, the economy is really about, our jobs is all about content. That's being pushed on us. It's about, am I visible? Am I getting the applause? Right? Am I getting, for the content that I am producing, the thing that I'm doing in my job? But whereas contentment is really about, this is my calling, not the need to be glamorized. Contentment is about possibly having to work behind the scenes and not be up front all the time. Being contented in our professions and our jobs has a lot more to do with becoming rather than achieving. See, if we're all about content as it pertains to our jobs and our careers or whatever, we're going to sacrifice peace and purpose to gain appearance and ambition. But contentment is all about God's presence and God's purpose in what we're doing for our jobs. Let me do another disclaimer here. Content or contentment is not about resignation. Contentment is not about resignation, it's about revelation. What's that revelation? A heart grounded in God, not gain. A heart grounded in God and not gain. Contentment is achieved by choice and repetition, not by chance. And we learn that. We have to learn that in whatever the circumstances. And here's the deal with us now. I believe there's two ways we learn. We learn the hard way or we learn the easy way. Now, you would think we'd all want to learn the easy way. Not so fast. Let me give you a couple examples of choosing the hard way versus choosing the easy way. The back of our house, we have a big area, and on a couple areas where we have grass and places for our grandkids to play, there's an electric fence. There's electric fence. There's like two sections of them that you can see, that you can butt up against or whatever if you're not careful. They're still far enough away from the house to where it shouldn't be an issue. However, our instructions to our grandsons have always been, assume the fence is on, do not go near it. Assume the fence is on, do not go near it. If you go near it, if you touch it, it will not be pleasant. It will hurt you. We've also given the same warning to our 5-month dog. All right? We didn't explain it the same way. We just, when the dog got close, we said, no, leave it, whatever. We used a couple of those short phrases so dog will know, don't go near that. Okay? So 2 grandsons, 1 dog. Easy way or the hard way? The youngest grandson so far has learned the easy way. He has stayed away from it. The other one, not so much. The dog, not so much, times 3. Okay? Easy way or the hard way? When it's the tough way, when we're learning in the difficult circumstances, I want to let you know that when we're learning to be content in the tough circumstances, that takes guts, that takes willpower, that takes faith. And if you want a poster child for that, go all the way back to Genesis. Dude named Joseph. Joseph, the coat of many colors guy. The guy that was thrown into a pit by his ever-loving brothers. He was sold into slavery. Then he got thrown into prison on top of being a slave. Every day, what did Joseph do? He chose to be content in that most difficult circumstance. He made the decision. Because contentment wasn't going to come by chance. It was going to come by repetition and by choice. Over and over again, making that choice. Paul helps us to stay grounded in this whole idea, because he says this in 1 Timothy 6:6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. Godliness with contentment is great gain. But for we brought nothing into the world, we can take nothing out of it. We come in empty-handed, we leave empty-handed. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. What does Paul clue us in here with? The word godly. The word godly. Like God. We are like God. We are like Jesus. Who is Jesus? Jesus is God incarnate. If you're like Jesus, you'll be content. If you're godly, you will be content. There's a connection there. And the wonderful connection with this godliness and contentment came in the form of Mother Teresa. Where did Mother Teresa spend her life? With the poorest of the poor. Pouring her life out to them every day, over and over. She made that choice to live that life of being like Jesus to those who were the least of these. Over and over, she made that choice that she was going to be content in this. And she was going to be like God to these kids. Over and over again. I have learned in whatever circumstances, I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. What has he learned? Let's read on. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. This tells me this: contentment comes from perspective, not possessions. Contentment comes from perspective, not possessions. It comes down to our attitude. Who do we believe that we are? What do we believe we should be about? What kind of limits do we have on our own lives? It is so easy to get caught up in trying to keep up with the Joneses financially. That's just sort of part of our world these days, is trying to keep up with our neighbors, our friends, financially. The problem is we find out much too late. The Joneses are deep in debt. We find out too late. Here's a perspective for you. The perspective comes from a guy named Nicholas Herman. You're going, I have no idea who Nicholas Herman is. In fact, I didn't either. I didn't know Nicholas Herman, but Nicholas Herman was a soldier in France. He entered the monastery in Paris, early 1600s. Entered the monastery. So he was a monk. I had not heard of Nicholas Herman, but I had heard of a guy named Brother Lawrence. He changed his name when he went in the monastery to Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection. But Brother Lawrence for short. After his death, his writings and some other recorded conversations in the 1600s, was turned into a book called Practicing the Presence of God. It's actually a free thing. You can get it now. You can download the whole thing, PDF. Practicing the Presence of God. And when certainly that's a monk. That's what monks are supposed to do. Their whole idea is to be secluded so they can have this great relationship with God, so they can pray, so they can read the Bible, so they can study. What's the big deal about a monk talking about practicing the presence of God? You know what Brother Lawrence did in the monastery? He cooked. He fixed shoes. He's what you call a cobbler. Not something you eat, okay? He washed dishes. But yet he was the only one out of that monastery that had anything published. Why? Because this monk figured out how to be content in every circumstance. He figured out a perspective that God was in every moment, that there was no division between the sacred and the ordinary. They came together each and every day. He experienced God in every menial task he did, through walking the garden, through scrubbing the dishes, through repairing sandals, to cooking potatoes. He experienced the connection with the divine, almost like, and I think this is sort of close to a quote from his, like every time he breathed in and breathed out, that was a connection with God. That's the perspective of someone that is finding contentment in whatever circumstance, in every circumstance. What a perspective. Paul also goes on to give us his perspective. The reason that he was able to be content during the repetition of the hardships and the successes and the sacrifices that he was dealing with, when he says this in Philippians 3, whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage that I may gain Christ. What's Paul's perspective? What's Paul's perspective? Everything that I've gained doesn't mean a thing. Everything I've lost really doesn't mean a thing. Because whether I've gained it or I've lost it, I've gained Christ. That's his perspective. His perspective is I have gained Christ. No matter the losses, no matter the gains, no matter the really great times, really bad times, I have Christ. That's his perspective. And then he really tells you the bottom line here. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. You've probably have heard this passage interpreted this way. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. It's a little bit different here. And I want you to understand there's a reason why it's written like this. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. We have to read this passage not as a bumper sticker, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. The Christ who gives me strength. Don't read it as a bumper sticker. You got to read it in context. D.A. Carson said this, a text without context is a pretext for a proof text. Okay, I'm going to repeat that again. A text without context is a pretext for a proof text. In other words, we can make the Bible say anything we want to if we take it out of context. Okay? Let me give you an example. This is my pet peeve of a context. How many have heard the phrase, where two or three are gathered, God's in the middle of it? How many of you heard that? Right? You're lying. I know most of you have heard it before. Right? A lot of times that passage is mentioned to say, you need to come to church. Because when two or three of us are gathered, God's going to be in our midst. That's a true statement, by the way. When God's people gathered, he's there. He actually told us in Hebrews, don't forsake the assembly of those together. But that's not what this passage means in context. You know what the passage means in context where two or three are gathered? Church discipline. Church discipline. They're going through somebody who is basically messed up in church, whatever mess up means, and you go to that person and you deal with them one-on-one. If you can't reconcile, you bring in a couple other people. Then you bring in the church. And that's where the passage comes in, where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I'm in the midst. In other words, God's saying, hey, if you're having issues with somebody in church, if you're having issue with a believer, and believers are meeting together with that sole purpose of reconciling, I'm going to be there to help you do that. I'm going to be in the midst. But we quote that out of context all the time. But it's really about church discipline. And in this case, I can do all this through him who gives me strength. How many times do we quote this out of context? The context, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And you hear people talk about their successes. Normally this comes up. When something positive happens to them, they win an event, win a race or whatever. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. But that's not the context. The context is in whatever the circumstance. The context is no matter whatever is going on, I choose to be content. I make the choice over and over to be content. Why? Because of Jesus in me. I can do all this in whatever the circumstances, no matter if it's positive or negative. When things are going great, I can manage my life when things are going great because Jesus is in my life. I can manage my life greatly even though it's garbage because Jesus is in my life. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. That's the context. And here we need to be reminded of this. When our power fails, his doesn't. When our power fails, and it will, his doesn't. Jesus is in me. I can do all things. I can do all this, whatever the circumstances, with Jesus in me. So when things are going great, when everything is great in my life, Jesus in me helps keep my greed and my jealousy and my self-absorption in check. And when things are going crappy, when it seems like the world is falling apart all around me, I can make it through. I can still be content in those situations because Jesus is in me to give me strength to go through whatever the circumstance. Hebrews tells us this. Keep your lives free from the love of money. Be content with what you have. Because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Be content in whatever the circumstances. You make the choice over and over and over again to be content. Because Jesus is with us. Never to leave us, never forsake us. His presence and his power. When we're flooded with content, Jesus invites us to contentment. It's not working harder. It's just choosing day after day, over and over again. Because he's with us. He gives us strength to be content. What are you relying on for contentment? What are you relying on for contentment? Are you relying on Christ? Or are you relying on comfort? Maybe you're relying on success. Maybe you're relying on approval. The band's going to come out, and they're going to lead us in this song. I think Megan's going to be leading us in a song called It Is Well. It's sort of a mashup between an old hymn and then some new lyrics, modern lyrics. And as they're singing and leading us in that, I want to ask you to make a commitment. To make a commitment to contentment. Make a commitment to contentment. It's not going to happen by chance. It's only going to happen because you choose over and over again. Choose today. May today be the first day where you choose contentment. And make it a daily habit. Repeat it over and over again. May that be your prayer today. To choose contentment and keep making that choice. Because Jesus is with you in whatever the circumstance. Would you please stand as we sing and as we pray?